Can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay. So I am going to talk about innovation cities, how you become a globally recognized innovation city. And I'm going to use a lot of examples. I'm aiming to make this useful. This is a workshop. It's a tutorial. The structure of this is going to be, we're going to open. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit so you know who's talking to you. I'm then going to talk about some of the principles that we've applied around the world. I've been doing this for about 25 years to help grow innovation cities. And then we're going to use some examples or share some examples of about 20 or 30 projects around the world very quickly to give you kind of a lexicon of what people are doing in other cities that you might use as sort of inspiration for what you do in your city. And then we're going to break up into 4 working groups or 4 sort of brainstorming sessions. Given the number of people that I'm seeing in the room, we might have the organizers. We have four of the organizers, but we might have them kind of have 2 groups each or something like that so that we can get smaller groups working together, where we're going to ask you to brainstorm initially for yourself about where you're from, some ideas, and then we'll have some sharing within those groups of those ideas. And then we'll have some readout of those ideas. And you won't have to share your idea if you don't want to, but you'll have an opportunity if you kind of like what you come up with to share it. Again, the goal is to be as practical as possible. So when we talk about a global innovation city, you can start by thinking about cities that are known for something that are not innovation cities per se. What are the global cities that come to mind? If I say movies, you say LA or maybe Hollywood, right? And this is important. If I say finance, New York, and maybe one other big city, London, maybe Singapore, right, exactly. So it's almost universal. If I say movies, there's probably nobody that as their first answer wouldn't say LA or Hollywood, and then their second answer they'd probably say Bollywood, right? But you're not gonna, but that's it, right? We get these very strong associations with what a city is good at. And if you were an aspiring actor and you were thinking, gee, where in the world should I go to further my career? Probably if you talk to your grandma or your best friend, they'd say, have you considered Hollywood, right? It's obvious, right? Now, maybe you think you're not good enough, maybe it's too far away, but that would be your aspiration, right? And so our goal is that your regions, your places, become the place that people aspire to go to pursue a certain kind of innovation. Entrepreneurs are bright. They're clever. They solve problems. They evaluate pros and cons of everything they do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be a good entrepreneur. And one of the things they're going to do is they're going to think about where, please come on in, just squeeze in, anywhere's fine. One of the things they're going to do is they're going to think about which city in the world. We even have some open seats. If you don't have a seat, if you want to sit on the edge of the stage or on the floor, you're welcome. One of the things they're going to do is they're going to say, where in the world should I build this business? They might build it where they happen to live already, right? They might, typically people go to university, they might get an advanced degree. They're going to think about wherever they got that degree as one possible place. They're going to think about where they grew up as another possible place where maybe they had family. But they're also, because now you're graduating, you're often moving. In the United States, most people do move when they graduate. When they graduate, they might consider going to the IT city. These are the actors that are going to Hollywood, or the people who want to make it in finance who decide to move to New York, right? So it's just not rocket science that if you want to become a leader in something, you have to be known for something and make it part of your brand for your city. Now, this is not just marketing. This is not just an ad campaign that says, Bloomington is good at X, right? You've got to do something. You've got to do some concrete things. I'm picking on Bloomington because I'm here from Bloomington. You got to do some concrete things to get into people's brains, right? And so we're going to walk through that. Now, think about this for a second. Before the first movie studio was built in Hollywood, it was just a kind of a tree-laden hill above LA, right? I think there were some fruit trees there, but clearly there was nothing about LA that made it naturally the place for movies other than good weather. And there are a lot of places in the world that have good weather. Right? So other places could have claimed that crown, but they did, right? And this is going to be the key lesson that you're going to take away today, is that for new industries in particular that have not yet been claimed, they're open for claiming. They're open for claiming by you. And right now we have a lot of new industries getting born. New industries that are going to change significantly the way we do lots of things. It's, we know that the automotive industry, wait, what's the city for automotive industry? Okay, Detroit, go Detroit. And Detroit, by the way, I think, more or less, created the first electric vehicles. But Detroit didn't become the capital of electric vehicles because each new technology wave can find a new home. And this is bad if you're already Detroit, unless you're on top of that particular thing or you've seen that. But it's good for everywhere else, right? And so people who say, gee, I think electric vehicles are going to be a new big thing, you can actually decide almost anywhere in the world that you want to make that new Detroit, right? And if Detroit wants it, they got to really say, okay, we're going to make the new Detroit the Detroit of this new thing, and we're going to move past the thing we were known for. And that's another big lesson that we're going to talk about, is moving past what you were known for, because what you're known for is probably something historic. It's probably something that's not growing quite as fast. If it is growing, if you're known for something that's growing fast, you should go to another session because you've already got your answer, right? But if you're known for something which is sort of done or well established, but it's not fast growing, then it's time to figure out what the fast growing new thing is that you're going to be known for in the future. And as I said, the good news is that you can steal that crown from other places. Now, if you look across the United States as an example, we have many great cities, and our great cities, who here is from St. Louis? Anyone from St. Louis? All right, woo, go St. Louis, right? So St. Louis is a proud city. St. Louis is a city that, if you go through the center of St. Louis, you have beautiful homes. St. Louis was known as the birthplace of the aviation industry in the United States with McDonnell Douglas, and those families are still very prominent in St. Louis and help support a lot of the public institutions. And Seattle, of course, got strong in aviation. It's not necessarily just one place. There can be a couple places that get strong. As aviation matured, St. Louis hasn't quite yet figured out its next thing. It has had a few things. There have been some beer there. There have been some financial services with MasterCard. But we don't have another "this is St. Louis" yet, right? What's growing perhaps is agriculture. Bayer, was there, formerly Monsanto. And if you look at the statistics, St. Louis is probably best known now as the leading venture capital city for ag tech. There's more venture capital investment in St. Louis in ag tech than any other city in the United States, and it's one of the top 3 in the world. So you take a city which worried for a while that they might be a flyover city, and in some cases, some of those direct flights got canceled and became a bit of a flyover city. If you look inside, you can find these opportunities where a city can step forward and be a world leader. I think just about anywhere. And as a result of that, I think there's a strategy available for you. So we're going to get into this a little bit more. So as I mentioned, the format of the workshop is we're going to do a little bit of background. I'm your speaker. I think I have maybe a slide on me in a minute. I've been building innovation hubs for 25 years. My company, Cambridge Innovation Center, has built the largest innovation hub in the US, Japan, Germany, the Netherlands, and Poland so far. In the US, we're about 500,000 square feet of several buildings that house collectively, I think probably at this point, around 1,500 startups. We'll give you some examples of this later. And so I've just been kicking around, there's a typo there. I've been kicking around in this field for a long time, and I just want to share what we think we've picked up over the years. So I think we've talked about the structure. We'll jump in. This is me, Amherst College undergrad, MBA from MIT, taught at MIT for a while, worked in Japan, I speak Japanese, worked for Boston Consulting Group, and then for the last 25 years running Cambridge Innovation Center. Along the way, I co-founded and chaired Lab Central, which is now the world's largest shared wet lab for life sciences startups. And I co-founded and chaired for the first 5 years Mass Robotics, which is the world's largest innovation hub for robotics companies. So that's me. The company, CIC, we were founded by a bunch of friends at MIT 25 years ago. We wanted to do startups. There wasn't really a place for it. 25 years ago means before WeWork, before all these things that you know about now. When you went to a landlord and you said, "I'm a startup," they kind of frowned at you. They said, "What's your credit look like?" And you would say, "I'm a startup." The whole definition is I have no credit. And they would sort of say, "Well, I don't think we really want you." And if they would take you, it might be because you had somebody, you're fortunate enough to have someone in your life who would guarantee your lease. My father was a university professor and not particularly wealthy, but My landlord said, okay, if your father will guarantee the lease, then we'll rent you space for 5 years. And this is someone who already came out of Boston Consulting Group, already had an MIT degree, and it was still hard. They still wouldn't release to me just space for a startup. That's how bad startups used to be, trying to get established. Our communities did not welcome startups. They did not make it easy. They did not smooth over the humps, the challenges, and so forth. A lot has happened over the last 25 years. It's gotten much easier. Most countries, most cities now see startups as the lifeblood for their future, and so they're doing a better job with this. How well your regions and cities do this is one of the dimensions on which you'll compete, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more in a minute. But just a sidebar on why startups are important for places. I'm sure this will be talked about in a lot of other stages here at this conference, but I think you probably know that established companies, they do die after a while. They grow large and then eventually they fail. Established companies are like trees. They can be powerful, they can be huge, they can be dominant, but they will fall over eventually. And the interesting question is, what is their average lifespan? What is the average lifespan for a sequoia? I think it's hundreds of years, I'm not sure exactly. The average lifespan for a corporation in the United States, and we have pretty healthy companies here, is about 50 years. It's less than a human, which means that if your city is supported by a major company that is a major employer, runs the factories, and makes the place economically healthy, provides the money that allows people to rent or buy their homes and put their kids through school and all of that, that major employer is shorter lived than your own residents. It's going to die. It's very likely to die statistically. It's going to go away. And so if your entire success of your place, of your city, of your county, of your state, rests on a few of these corporate citizens, and by the way, nothing wrong with this. The companies aren't doing anything wrong. This is just the normal process of economies. Then you're at risk. And you basically have to be constantly figuring out what the next thing is, or your place is going to decline. And I think this is nothing new for anyone here. And by the way, we're not just people from the United States here. We've got people from all over the world. I've been chatting with people as I went around earlier. I met some folks from the Congo earlier. Everybody has the same questions. Everyone has the same needs. This isn't new. There's nothing new under the sun here. We have to figure out how to be productive, how to employ, how to grow, or we're not going to have healthy places, right? So these friends from MIT got together. My dad did guarantee the lease. We rented a little bit of space. We called it Cambridge Innovation Center. And it grew pretty quickly. In 2015, MIT did this map. This is the MIT campus, and this is a heat map of startups around MIT. And you probably guessed it, but that big red dot is Cambridge Innovation Center. What happened was we built a place that was actually pretty nice for startups. Our lease terms, if you want to call it that, were 30-day rolling deals, meaning that nobody had an obligation longer than 30 days. It was inexpensive. It had all the sort of toys that you might want. After some years, we figured out that we should start getting lab equipment and not just office space. And that's where Lab Central was born. As I mentioned, it's now the world's largest shared wet lab for life sciences startups. But the basic idea was not that different than Airbnb or Uber, sharing things. If we bought a microscope and other kinds of equipment that you might need in a lab, we'd buy it once and share it with hundreds of companies. It made it very, very cheap to start a company in that space. It also meant that they could start and they could run it as much as a year and a half faster. If you were coming out of a university with a life sciences idea for a new drug, let's say, and your first step is to build a lab, many of you are very familiar with this because you're in economic development. How long does it take to design, finance, build, permit a lab? Best case, 12 to 18 months. And so that means your technology will be waiting during that period, and someone else is probably going to win in the sector if they have to do that. So as an example, we went ahead and built that in life sciences. Everybody loved it. We've had, I think, $19 billion so far invested by private investors in the companies in that shared lab, making it, to our knowledge, about a fifth or a sixth of all Series A and seed life sciences investment in the entire United States in this one lab. By the way, it's nonprofit. I'm not tooting the horn of some business that's making a lot of money. This is just about making it work better to make companies. There are some really good ways to do that. Now, I've been talking about making your city an innovation city and having a specialty, and I've sort of fallen into our story, which is building innovation hubs. The link is, and there are a lot of ways to make a city famous for something, But if you want to make Hollywood famous for movies, you've got to start with at least one studio, right? You start with something physical, something concrete, an actual place, an actual building. You can grow that. You can add more buildings. You can bring other companies around it, but you've got to start with some sort of core. And the core that we talk about is an innovation hub. We'll talk more about what that is in a minute. But innovation hubs tend to go in a part of your city that we're often calling innovation districts, right? That's like the neighborhood that hub is in, and the others move in next to it. That's what makes it a district. Districts are very important and healthy, and we believe that districts are built around an initial kind of core draw. That core draw, by the way, can also be a university. Doesn't have to be just start with a hub. Universities can form a great basis for a district, but you still need to have something like that red dot. MIT was around for 150 years before we had a Cambridge Innovation Center, and there were not an appreciable number of startups around MIT, surprisingly. So you can't just have something like a university. You need to be very focused and have something that focuses on startups specifically as well. Okay, so we're now in 10 cities around the world. We manage, this is the European version, around 130,000 square meters, call it 1.5 million square feet of shared space. These are the places where we run the largest hubs in those countries. And we had about 11,000 companies come through our facilities to date. So I'm not really trying to toot our own horn so much as just to show that this does work. In fact, Google Android is probably the most famous company. It started, there's one guy on the West Coast and one guy in Cambridge, both in their apartments. The Cambridge guy moved into our center, grew that to 200 people. That's where they wrote the software for Android, which is now the most prevalent mobile phone operating system in the world. It's neck and neck here in the United States with Apple, but outside the world, because it's open source and it's cheap, it dominates where Apple doesn't. We have a bunch of new facilities coming. One we're particularly in Fukuoka, Japan, Osaka, Japan, Seoul, Korea. One that I want to point out in particular is New York City. Last week, the New York City Mayor's Office announced that it's going to build a new climate tech hub in Brooklyn. It's going to be called Batworks because it's in the building called the Brooklyn Army Terminal. And they announced that they're going to put a $100 million grant of city money in to build this. It's going to be 154,000 square feet. I'm sharing this as an example of the kinds of things that some cities are able to do. It doesn't need to be that big necessarily, but these are the kinds of things that places are doing. And they were kind enough to appoint us to run that. How we're doing innovation is changing. Historically, innovators really wanted to keep secrecy. Secrecy was a big focus. And this is Nikola Tesla's lab. It was in the mountains in Colorado. Anyone from Colorado? All right, we've got a Colorado, good. So you may know that Tesla did much of his early work on radar. Apparently, he set up the whole radar thing, and he wasn't sure if it worked, so he put his head in front of it to see if that worked. And then he turned up the volume and made it into microwave and put his head in front of it to see if that worked. And he was brilliant, so maybe this works. I'm not sure. But this idea has its limits, and the problem is that technology is moving very, very quickly right now. And so if you're in isolation, you're not around people who know about the latest developments in your field. Think about AI and how quickly that's moving. If you're off in sort of Alaska in your own building working on AI, that might work to a degree, but everything else going around you in places where there's a lot of AI would be inspiring you. And so people started to move into cities. And they started to do their startups in their houses because there really, as I said earlier, there was no place for startups. So a lot of the big famous starts for startups were in people's houses. This is obviously Steve Jobs, Hewlett-Packard, Walt Disney, lots of other examples of that. YouTube started in a garage. This also has its limits, right? It's a little awkward to invite your first employees to come to your home when you're starting your business, but people did it because the world wasn't welcoming of startups. As I said earlier, to try to rent something next to MIT, they took a big toll. Fortunately, the world is now organized to create these startup spaces, and you've all been in many startup spaces around the world. This is nothing new to you, but looking at it as a tool for economic development may be interesting. When you build a tool which is very attractive, like the Lab Central example I gave earlier, where we have about a fifth of the United States' investment, early stage investment in life sciences flowing into it, suddenly by just merely going in there, your access to capital shoots up. Investors are going to stop by if they hear there's a special place in an industry to see what's going on. They're going to knock on doors. They're going to introduce themselves. They're going to take people out to lunch. It's like going to a leading university and having recruiters come. It's the same thing. So this is a tool that you can use to build your city. It's not actually an entirely new concept. And this is a fun story that we ran across. This was in the 1870s. There was a building in Boston at 109 Court Street, a guy named Charles Williams. He had a shop that sold like wires and batteries. This is kind of the world's first Radio Shack. How many of you remember Radio Shack? All right. This actually existed in the 1870s. And he rented out the upper floors here to entrepreneurs. And the guy on the left here, this is Alexander Graham Bell. He rented out the room right up here in the top. And at the same time, Thomas Edison rented out another room in the building. We actually don't know which room it was anymore. Apparently they hated each other, but they were referencing each other. They were pushing each other. They were looking at what each other was doing. And interestingly, they both hired the same guy. This is Lewis Latimer. Lewis was a shopkeeper in the Radio Shack downstairs, and he was very good at drawing. And both Graham Bell and Thomas Edison hired Latimer to do their patent drawings for the telephone and the light bulb. So same guy. And what that tells you is that there was actually an innovation hub going on here. It wasn't just a building that people were renting in. This was a community, and it worked. Two of the biggest inventions of all time came out of this. Interestingly, you could probably tell from the photo, Lewis was also black. And that's interesting because it shows that these hubs can provide access to a wider set of people than normally are welcomed into these innovation communities. The hub itself becomes a vehicle for a broader access. Okay, so this thing works. It worked 150 years ago, and it's working today. And we think it can work for you. There is some science behind why this works. This is, and I will wrap up so you can be in the workshop setting shortly. But I thought it would be good to give you this kind of, if you will, the grounding in the science, if you will, the basis, if you will, for why these things work. We think this is a study that was done at MIT, and unabashedly, I grew up in Cambridge. I'm an MIT guy, guilty as charged. So I look at a lot of studies from MIT, but there are similar studies that have been done around the world. They looked at something kind of interesting. They looked at patents at MIT where more than one MIT professor's name was on the patent. And they assumed that meant that these professors collaborated on the research or the innovation. And then they looked at the number of feet between those professors' desks. And what they found was when you got out to about 2,400 feet, which is about half a mile or 0.6 of a kilometer, 0.6, 0.8, something like that, there was no more collaboration. Basically, the collaboration happens with people who are right near you. People don't collaborate. They don't innovate. They don't create things. This is like the new CEO of Amazon kind of railing against remote work, and I'm not going to get into that whole battle, but he did say that he basically didn't think people innovated over Zoom, right? And interestingly, I think the company Zoom has just mandated its workers to return to office 5 days a week. So there's something about being physically close to each other that matters. I'm not saying, by the way, that some remote work isn't good. I'm just saying that being close together is a key piece of making innovation work. Now, some people say, well, okay, well, this is interesting, Tim, but maybe they did that because like the bio department is all in one building and the chem department's all. Maybe this is just an artifact of where people sit, and it's a good criticism. And in fact, Matthew Claudel, who was the lead author on this, did another study to get at that question. And in the second study, it's a little more complicated. He looked at pairs of professors at MIT who were in different buildings, but then one of them moved, so now they're in the same building. So the same professors, but just before and after. Before when they were different buildings, and after when they were in the same building. And he looked at, in this case, at the number of papers that they published together with their names on their both names on a paper. Again, signifying that they had some sort of collaboration, essentially innovating together. And what he saw was that before they were in the same building, there was a very low level of collaboration. And as soon as one of them moved into the other's building, this is like when that guy moves into the apartment building and then you start dating, right? It's not that different, right? It's like, why are you you don't even know this person until they are kind of around you. You run into them, right? They're in your dorm at college. These are the people that we remember that become lifelong friends. So there's nothing new under the sun here. It's just saying, you got to get people physically into the same space and literally the same building, not just near each other, in order for this collaboration effect to take place. So what's happened in this world of innovation hubs around the world? All right, well, we've got some examples here. 2 of them are ours, the Japan and the US one that I've talked about. France has a wonderful one called Station F. How many people have heard of Station F? In some of their, like a third of us. This is probably the most beautiful innovation hub in the world. It was philanthropically funded by a big entrepreneur, and the French government gave the land. And it's just gorgeous if you can get out there. If next trip you go to Paris, you should go see Station F. This is Singapore's. This is called Launchpad. It's about 500 startups in a corner of Singapore, not far from the central business district. It was kind of happenstantial. They were old buildings. They were slated to be torn down. They said, let's give them to startups. And then they just filled up with startup after startup after startup. Anyone from Singapore here? No Singapore's today. Okay, so they're, by the way, building a new innovation campus to replace this one that we've been chatting with them about as well. So these are kind of the first generation, the sort of general innovation hubs. These are hubs where any kind of startup, any kind of technology is there. And I mention this as a bit of a caution. You can get a general innovation hub to go if you are already a major city, there's a lot of startups, and you're in the center of the city, in the best place in the city, you can kind of pull this off, the general innovation hub. The problem with it is that it, by definition, it isn't focused on anything, so it won't differentiate you. If you build a general innovation hub in a region that doesn't yet have a story, you're going to get just the local companies might move in, the local startups might move in, but you're not going to be pulling from the next county over, the next state over, or another country, because you don't have a story that tells people why they should be there. So the next sort of evolution is these, what I'll call industry innovation hubs. And this is getting popular. These are hubs which are built around a particular topic. The drivery, here we go. Got to hit that button. No, it's not working. There we go. Down here, this is in Berlin. It's called the Drivery. It's an automotive industry hub. They got a whole bunch of the automotive companies to back it. They got a big old space. They got, I want to say, like 150 companies that are working around automotive innovation to all move in. And interestingly, you could argue that Berlin is not the leading automotive city in Germany. Munich would have a better argument for that because BMW is there. Or someone could tell me, I think, is it Stuttgart where Mercedes is? So Berlin, but it's a startup city. And they said, hey, we're going to be leading the change in automotive. Really interesting model. Similar examples, the Baker Biogenuity Hub at UC Berkeley in California. Greentown Labs, which is a climate tech hub in the Boston area in Somerville, Massachusetts. And I mentioned earlier, Mass Robotics in Lab Central. This is, if you will, the second generation of these hubs, and it's an option. The trouble with this, and it's a good idea. The trouble with this is if you're not already well established in that industry and someone else is, this may not be enough, right? So if you set up a life sciences hub in Indianapolis, but Indianapolis is not in the top 5 life sciences clusters in the United States yet, and you've got Lilly, so maybe it is. I don't know my stats here, but if it weren't, then it's not focused enough. People might still go, to Berkeley's hub or to something in San Diego or something in Boston. So it's a start, and this does work. I mentioned earlier that ton of investment into these hubs. There are a lot of hubs like this planned around the world. Cybersecurity in Arlington, Virginia. Berkeley is planning another one focused on materials innovation, another one focused on climate. We did a kind of mapping of this. And we said, okay, here are these general innovation hubs. You might have heard of New Lab in New York. The Engine Accelerator is at MIT. The Capital Factory in Austin is a great hub that are kind of general. And then there are these focused industry hubs. Excuse me, these industry hubs like the Drivery I mentioned. There's yet a third type which we started to see coming in the radar, which we're calling focused hubs. And this is one that I really want to talk about with you guys today. So a focused hub is where you're saying, I'm not just going to stop at the industry. I'm going to become really the best in the world, if possible, at something very narrow. So Manchester, UK, which is a secondary city in the UK, although a great city. I understand they know how to play football a little bit, what we call soccer. They set up a hub focused on graphene. Graphene, as you may know, is a new material. It's a lattice of carbon atoms that makes a very, very thin, flat, slippery surface. It's a superconducting surface. They put it on boats because it's slippery, so boats go faster in competition races. there are a lot of applications for graphene, but the thing about it is that it's really hard to work with. It requires a lot of special equipment and a lot of special expertise. And so by creating a hub focused on graphene, they leapfrog anybody else who's, say, doing a material science hub. Because now this clearly is the best place in the world to do work on graphene specifically. And they were able to get companies from all over the world to move to Manchester to focus on graphene. So this is another tool in your toolbox as you think about what you want to do. Army is in another Manchester. It's in Manchester, New Hampshire. They're focused on regenerative medicine. So they're near Boston and they're doing life sciences. And you think, well, that's not going to work, because Boston is so big in life sciences. But they said, no, we're going to become the king of regenerative medicine, which is a subfield of life sciences. They convinced the DoD to give them $120 million, and they built a Disneyland of facilities for any kind of company that wants to work in regenerative medicine. So this is an example. If you're Manchester, New Hampshire, and you want to get a leg up on, kind of your big brother Boston in life sciences, go deeper and be better. So the lesson here is that, I said at the beginning, entrepreneurs are smart, and they're going to go to the best place in the world for them. They're going to try. Many of them are going to go there. So if you can figure out how to make the case that you're the best place in the world, or maybe in your state or your region, for a particular thing, you're going to disproportionately win in that area. Now, is this a zero-sum game? Are we just fighting with each other, like giving tax breaks to corporations to come to our city instead of somebody else's? I don't think so. Because we can actually all focus on a different thing. So if all the cities in Indiana were to focus on the same thing, they all said, we're going to do AI or something, then you're just going to divide, right? And nobody's going to be successful. 16 Tech, can be more successful if it's doing something different than what the folks at Purdue are doing, right? And so the idea is, here, by specializing, we can actually lift all boats. Each place gets its thing. Each place is better at that thing than anybody else. It moves innovation forward in that specific area. Innovation fixes the world. That's actually why I'm in this. I think if we want to make the world better for our kids, then we need to solve a bunch of problems, and innovation is one of the best ways to do it. It's not the only way, but it's one of the best ways to do it. I'm fond of saying, there are a lot of ways that we're getting better every year at things in society. But when you think about it, innovation is probably the one that's most consistently we're getting better every year. I ask people, are we getting better politicians every year? Not always, right? You might think some years better, some years maybe not, right? And you could be on any side of the political spectrum to agree with me on that. So innovation is one of the few things where we seem to be stepping up regularly. It's also apolitical, it's non-sectarian, it's just better. If you figure out how to have a light bulb that uses less electricity, or make food, that's more plentiful so people can eat, that's just a good thing. That's what we should be doing. So the focused hub is your tool for that. Basically, we say if you're an emerging innovation area and a small population, you want to focus more on the focused hub. If you're an existing innovation hotspot, like you're San Francisco, and you're a large city, you can probably get away with a general innovation hub. So just as you think about the types of hubs or the types of ways that you might get your innovation district or your city's story to sing, this might be that. So I won't skip that, actually. So if you do this well, by the way, one of the interesting things is that the buyers of the technology that your companies make will start coming, right? So I mentioned mass robotics earlier. I used to be the chair. I'm on the board now. The chair of Amazon Robotics succeeded me as the board chair. You can imagine the value of that. Why is Amazon Robotics stepping in and having one of their employees be the chair of mass robotics? It's because it's really important to Amazon to be close to the latest innovation. The buyers will come swarm around this if you do it right? And Amazon's probably one of the biggest buyers in the world of robotics. So if you're a startup and you're working on robotics, would you like the Amazon team to be kind of coming in and checking you out and saying hello all the time? You bet you would, right? By the way, just about everybody in robotics is a sponsor of mass robotics. All the big companies that do robotics are a sponsor of mass robotics. Japanese companies, European companies, they come through, they knock on doors, they do lunches. This is a thing you get if you get known as the hub of some particular technology. I imagine that every company that's interested in buying graphene at this point has visited Manchester, UK's graphene hub, right? Why wouldn't you? You'd be crazy not to. It also attracts, as I mentioned, the global innovators. Maybe there's an Israeli company or a Taiwanese company that has some technology in your area, and they hear that you're the hotspot. They're going to at least come visit, but they might move in, they might hire people, they might have their regional offices there or their national offices there. Why are they going to come to Bloomington over all other places, let's say? It's got to be because Bloomington's better, right, for this particular thing. And then lastly, it serves as a magnet for investors. If I'm an investor, let's say I'm a clean tech investor, and New York City builds a clean tech hub, do you think I'm going to visit? Of course I'm going to visit, right? Like, why wouldn't I? There are only a few places in the world that matter, and it's going to be on my itinerary as I go around the world and travel. So this is why this stuff works. Universities, by the way, do build hubs. They can be a different thing, so I just want to be careful. They're very good, but they're not what I'm talking about. When a university says, I'm building a hub for my students, that's great, but that's not drawing the innovator from Taiwan, across the world to be there, right? Universities sometimes, and there are some great ones, build these more intense innovation hubs with like equipment and so forth. But they usually end up saying, okay, there's a preference for my own graduates and so forth, and becomes kind of a local story. So you can convert these into a global story. You can. But you want to be intentional about that. You want to think, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. Right. I'm not trying to just make this the best entrepreneurs at Purdue are here. I'm trying to make the best entrepreneurs in the world are here if possible. So this is the beginning of what you're going to be preparing. I'm going to ask you to write a kind of a story. The story will be looking backward from 5 years. If you want to do 10 years, that's fine. Of how the place you pick, whether it's your city or your region, became globally known for a thing. And so just write a story. It can totally fictitious. It can be impossible or less likely to happen or more likely. It's up to you. But kind of pick something and say, this happened and then this happened. And then, the chair of Amazon's version of that came and became the chair, and then these things happened. Just sort of write that story. And it's going to just, I think, spark some thoughts about the kinds of actions you might need to take in your locale in order to make something like this happen. In doing that, you're going to have to think about, what would we focus on? And there is something here that's not intuitive that we encourage you to think about. A lot of what I've talked about until now is intuitive, but there's one thing here that's not intuitive, so I'm going to listen carefully. So, by the way, I want to give credit to Boston Consulting Group. It's my former employer. I was brainstorming with them last year about this, and this is their idea, not mine. But they said, most people tend to lead with what they're already good at. So if I go to Abu Dhabi, and I say, what should you guys focus on for anyone from Abu Dhabi here? I know we have some in the conference. What should you guys focus on for your innovation hub? They tend to think oil and gas, right? Because that's their thing, right? And that's okay. That's like going to Detroit and saying, okay, let's focus on automotive, and that makes sense. That's the history. The trouble is, as I said earlier, that our existing industries die, things change, and it is possible to aim at something new that nobody's won at yet. To aim at something where you could be bigger than everything else that's out there. And so the non-intuitive thing is to lead not based on your current strengths, but by your ambition. Meaning, what can you envision for your area 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? What's that story you can imagine about what you're good at? It can be wild, right? If you don't focus on anything, you won't get anywhere. If you don't pick a point on the map and try to drive there, you're not going to get there, right? So you got to come up with something. And nobody's going to grade you on this, so don't feel like it has to be, reasonable or safe or anything like that. Go a little bit unsafe and try to think, what could I do in my place that's really big? That's aiming high. And I'll give you a couple of examples just to sort of spark your thinking on this. If you talk to a politician in many cities in the United States, not all, and you say, it could be governors, could be mayors, and you say, what is your number one problem? Most of them, probably at least half, will say housing is their number one problem. And they might add mobility or transportation after that. But we have homeless issues around the United States. We have unhoused. Housing is expensive. It's kind of intractable. We ask developers to build some affordable or inclusionary units. And these days it's hard for them to do that because the interest rates are against them, and so projects aren't built as much. You don't get as many units as you hope for. Which means you're not really dealing with a problem. In my own hometown of Cambridge, we think we need 12,000 new units over the next, by 2032, I think, in the next 7 years. And Last year we built like 100. It doesn't work, right? So let's take housing. Housing isn't sexy. It's not AI, but it's actually one of the biggest markets in the world. What if you said, I'm going to build a housing innovation hub? Right now we build houses. By the way, if I told you that to get a car, go back to my Detroit people, instead of going to one of these great companies that have really ironed out all the kinks, the only way to get a car was that you had to hire someone locally to buy pieces of metal, machine them, screw them together, and build you a car one by one. What do you think the car would cost? I don't know, but it's got to be millions and millions if I had to have someone make me a car from scratch. And that would be crazy, but that's actually how we build houses. You get wood and you cut it and you screw each one together. That's how we build houses. So it's not a surprise that they're so expensive, right? So there's got to be other ways to do it. So I'm just using this as an example to sort of get your thinking going about the very mundane area. Starbucks decided to do coffee shops and became the global leader in coffee shops in an already established category. So it's okay that someone else knows about this. You're just going to do it better in your place. You're going to do the next generation. You're going to blow their socks off. That's the idea. And so let's say you say, okay, we're going to figure out how to build houses in volume and cheaply. Maybe we're going to use AI, robotics, some of these new technologies. You probably should. Advanced materials, you probably should. That would be an example of what I'm talking about. Right now, by the way, there is no place that I can think of in the world, and this is kind of my field, that is a leader in housing innovation. Doesn't that blow your mind? It's one of the biggest markets that we have, and nobody has claimed it. Nobody. So there are a lot of fields like that where nobody has claimed the future because nobody got their act together and said, okay, we're going to focus on this and we're going to win and we're going to make the future happen. By the way, I'm not suggesting we're building research institutes that figure out how to build a better housing. You're not hiring a housing tech. What you're doing is you're going to figure out, how can I convince the 200 smartest startups in the world with ideas for new, future, cheaper, better housing to come and do that in my backyard? How am I going to get them all to come together and concentrate? Now, you saw that big red dot earlier at MIT with all the startups in one building. You saw that data that says people collaborated from their same building. The key here is concentrating innovators, lots and lots of innovators in one place, right? So nobody's concentrated housing innovators. What would you need to do? Well, I thought about it a little bit. I think, gee, I'd probably, houses are big. If somebody's going to build a lot of houses and prototype houses, I need like acres and acres. I'm talking about hundreds of acres of space for this. This is not just a building. If they're going to be building these houses sort of experimentally, if it rains a lot, maybe I want like a kind of a very lightweight roof system that's 50 or 60 feet up or 100 feet up over this structure that would catch the rain and sort of create a nice place underneath. I'm just making this up as I go. I'm not a housing expert. Maybe I put solar on top so I can pay for all of this. So I'm not just saying spend money. Maybe you make money at this, right? And then I invite all these housing companies. And then let's say, right now, a lot of places have funds already to pay for inclusionary housing. In Massachusetts, we subsidize every inclusionary housing unit by about $275,000. That's public money that we actually write a check from the state to a developer every time they build a new inclusionary housing unit. The low-cost housing manufacturing companies that I've talked to say that they can build an entire house for that. So we might not need new money for this. We might be able to get money we're already planning to spend to build these. And I'm not saying we build them as a demo and nobody lives there and we throw it away afterwards. I'm saying we build a city. We build these houses and people live in them. This is just, again, this is me giving you one idea to spark your thoughts about how you could dominate in an industry and make the world better, but also define the industry of the future for your place. There are other considerations, and if you read the chart, I went forward. The first was lead with ambition. Address your country's and region's biggest challenges. Think about solving challenges, not necessarily just doing what you're already good at. Yeah, sure, capture your competitive advantage. Like if you're someone here is from Wyoming. Who is Wyoming? Wyoming is probably not going to do a marine or blue tech startup that's not their competitive advantage. So think about what you'd be good at, obviously, when you work through this. If you have an existing ecosystem, leverage it, but don't get carried away with it. If you don't, you're going to build it, right? If you don't have housing experts, that's fine. Like we'll figure that out, right? You might need more subsidies and other things to make them come. There are a bunch of levers that you can use to get people to come to your hub. And I'm going to share a couple with you now to spark your thinking. The first is what we call the customer lever. If you can figure out how to marshal some big customers to come and support your hub, then the startups will come. And it's the thing they care most about is selling their product. If they can sell their product, they can grow as a company. And what do I mean by saying that? So we're doing some work in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Riyadh needs about a million new homes to keep up with its population growth over the next 10 years. If I could convince the ruler of that country, sometimes it's easier when you have a ruler of a country instead of a legislature, to, for instance, promise to buy 100,000 homes from a housing innovation hub that we build in Riyadh. And this is just hypothetical. This doesn't exist, but giving you the example. And then I go to that Taiwanese startup or that Israeli startup or that US startup that's building cool new homes, and I say, come here, and by the way, if you just show up and we admit you, we're going to build 100 of your homes. And if you do well in the program, we're going to build 1,000 of your homes. I think we'll get 100% participation from the startups around the world in that sector. So that's the customer lever. And so what you're trying to do is figure out, is there a way I can bring a customer to the table? You might be surprised at the many ways you can do this. I'll give you one more example. So I was fortunate enough recently to meet the guy who runs the sewer systems in New York. Okay? Sewer in New York, a little bit mundane. Anyone know how much they spend each year on sewer maintenance in New York? It's about $3 or $4 billion. It turns out it's a big industry. This is totally hypothetical. This is not a real conversation, but just to spark. Imagine you built a sewer technologies innovation hub, and the city of New York agreed that it would preferentially, prototype and test the technologies of the companies in this hub. Do you think that prototypical, company coming out of Paris that has some cool sewer technology would be interested in joining that hub? They absolutely would. Do you think New York could go to Tokyo and London to their sewer system heads and say, let's build a consortium amongst the three of us, and we'll all agree to test these new sewer technologies that lower our costs and make the sewers work better? You bet they totally would. So you think you don't have a resource, but your sewer system could be your resource when you're talking about marshaling the customer that makes your hub work. So think about what people spend money on in your region, who's spending money already, who has a need already. Can you tap into that and make it the customer that makes that hub successful? It's clear in something like sewers or housing. You can probably find a way to apply that to other fields. So another lever, by the way, and this is a little more obvious, but if the field requires special equipment, that's great. If you were building a nuclear fusion hub and you need $1 billion something to test or build new nuclear fusion stuff for nuclear fusion companies, you can see I am a total non-expert. That would be good, because whoever builds that $1 billion nuclear fusion kind of core facility is going to draw every nuclear fusion company in the world to its doorstep. People are trying to do this now in quantum technology. In Illinois, I think there's the Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park, which is planned, and they've announced that there's going to be a $500 million investment in creating IQMP, and they're going to try to be the best place to build quantum tech in the United States. It's an example of this. So I think I need to kind of get to the next phase. So I'm just going to show you some pictures, and I won't talk anymore. This is Lab Central in Massachusetts, what it looks like. This is a life sciences hub. This is Mass Robotics, what it looks like. This is Greentown Labs, what it looks like, climate tech. Third generation hubs. This is the regenerative medicine hub I mentioned in Manchester, New Hampshire. This is that graphene hub in Manchester, UK. This is one we're involved with in California that's going to focus on data center energy use. This is a fun one. This is in Portland, Oregon, and they want to build a hub focused on making footwear. Nike's there, but a bunch of other companies are. And this is not sponsored or owned by Nike. This is just really cool. footwear creatives come together in some old, buildings in downtown, but they think that they have the right to be the footwear leader of the world, and they might, right? I mean, Milan does allow that too. You don't have to be the only place in the world. You just have to be one of the 2 or 3 best places in the world for this to work. Bunch of people building cell and gene therapy hubs around the world. Bunch of people building quantum computing hubs around the world. This is a fun hub that we're working with in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. It's in Misk City. It's personally owned by Mohammed bin Salman. They want to focus on reforesting the deserts, or afforesting the deserts in Saudi Arabia, turning them back into forests, which is just a wild concept, and apparently it's somewhat doable, especially if you have enough money. But it would transform the country. I've talked for long enough. I think I want to stop. I was going to say here's some best practices. I have to do 1 or 2 more slides, and I promise I'll stop. One of the most important things you need to do when you build these hubs, by the way, is to make them neutral. If you make this, like we have mass robotics, Amazon's on the board, but it's not Amazon's hub. As soon as you make it one company's or one investor's thing, then what happens is the other companies will shun it, or the other investors will tell their portfolio companies not to go. So this has to be for everybody. This has to be a mecca, not a kind of a proprietary hub. Now, one university is okay. Universities are viewed as sort of nonprofit and for the public and all that. That's okay. But don't go down the path of having one company. If you have one company that wants to support you a lot, that's great. Just get 3 or 4 or 5 other companies in the sector also to come. And you can play a clever game here. Maybe Amazon's the only online retailer that's your supporter, but you also have Google that is different, there, etc. So you can give people a little bit of sense of exclusivity, but basically the hub needs to be neutral. Make it beautiful. Make people want to be there. Make it a place where people gather, where you've got lots of events and things going on. 16 Tech, I think, had this vision and really pursued this. Maybe I'll stop on this. Understand that these things are not just about buildings. They're about what happens in the buildings. We call it the hardware and the software. So the hardware is the buildings, and the software is how people work together and get together. The example I use to illustrate this is Harvard University, at least for now, is got a pretty big endowment. And someone told me that they had enough money. Thank you. Someone told me they have enough money that they could rebuild the university, buy the land and rebuild the university 7 times over. I know that's true, but let's say that's true. Let's say that Harvard University went to New Hampshire, bought some land, and built an exact copy of the entire Harvard University, brick by brick. And they could do this. Would that copy be Harvard? And everyone's shaking their heads. Of course not. You don't have the professors, you don't have the students, you don't have the history. So you got to remember, it's the hardware. Of course, you need it, but that's just the starting point. It's what you do in it, how people connect, who's there, all of those things. You want to keep that in mind. So I'll stop at this point. I don't know how to turn that to black. Can we make that go black? I'm going to ask people to divide into groups. My colleagues who are here, can you stand up, who are leading the groups? Okay. Ali Winter from Chile, Mike Jackson from the UK, Victor Mulas from Spain, and Tim Rowe from the United States of America. We are going to divide down, and I think that's Victor, why don't you take those 2 tables, and I'm going to suggest that you kind of talk to the groups, remind them of what they're going to do, and then have 2 subgroups. So maybe the table is the natural group. Does that work? Because I just don't think the layout works any other way. So the tables are the groups. We're going to go around. Mike, why don't you take this section? Ali, why don't you take that section? I'll take the last 2, and then we'll all kind of move around a little bit. And so the first step here is on your electronic device, paper, however you like it, just start writing your looking back from 5 or 10 years story of how the region you chose became one of the world's top 2 or 3 or 4 leading places for a particular thing. And just write the story about how you got there, what you think would have had to have happened for you to get there. All right. Thank you. Start. Test, test. So, folks, we've got just 5 minutes left, and the organizers wanted to just pick a couple of ideas to sort of highlight, and we're going to ask people to give just a 1-minute version of their idea that they shared. And if it's all right, Edward, you had a very, I think, compelling idea. Do you want to just quickly, sort of stand up at the mic and share your idea?
Thank you. So my idea, I'm from Washington, D.C., and if you're from the United States, you'll know that, we don't have a lot of rail transport, especially compared to Europe, where, high-speed rail is all over the place. And my idea was to take a rail yard or a similar place, either in D.C. or another city that has lots of rail, and buy that and build a center near there where you could have office space and floor space to innovate on rail space, and then you could use that rail yard to test your inventions and sort of further innovate on them. And this would be funded by companies like Amtrak or governments that have rail, such as like the New York government with the New York subway, and we would then promise them a way to get new innovations in their industry. So we could promise new track innovations for their subway system or rail network or whatever they have.
Thank you very much, Edward. So a rail technology innovation hub. You can imagine how that could belong in a number of places around the United States. I think we have someone over there from Ukraine that was nominated. Is that right? Do you have a mic? No. Okay.
All right. My name is Yehor. I'm originally from Ukraine, have been to States for 3 years. And the project that we came up with is timely. It's about drones. So we want to build a drone production innovation center based in Kyiv, Ukraine, right on the riverside. So the drones that we're all familiar with, that have 4 propellers, flying, we can take them a little bit further down the road and create sea drones. As our hub is going to stand on the Dnieper River, it's going to be a great place to do that. It's going to be a great sandbox. We can also use some technologies to come up with some autonomy drones. So we are planning to partner with Ukrainian government, first of all, to get the maybe land and permission, first of all, to get that sandbox up and running, as well as other European cities and towns to provide some financial support and actually to get engineers from all over the world who are interested in this branch of future to explore and just to work together. You want to add something?
Thank you very much. Organizers, did we have anyone else tipped to talk? We have a volunteer? Where? Who's our volunteer?
I'm being volunteered. My name is Tim Williamson from New Orleans, Louisiana. In New Orleans, which is a 300-year-old city, we were very strategic in transportation because of the river and peaked out in 1960. But about 20 years ago, Katrina came to New Orleans and destroyed New Orleans as a city. So the thinking there is resiliency. How do you build an industry around resiliency and disaster recovery? We had to recover every hospital, every university, every single business had to be restarted. So we restarted the city. So the thinking is how you turn a disaster into an opportunity and to build an industry around resiliency.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Does anyone else want to volunteer for last? We have probably room for one last. Okay. I'll start here. Stacy, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stacy Stube. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, USA. We actually started a project where we converted an abandoned garment factory. Baltimore once had a very vibrant garment industry. It became dormant between the 1950s and 1970s. And in this fashion innovation hub, we were able to cluster the industry together, everything from the veterans of the needle trade, so that's sewn goods, so upholstery, to entrepreneurs, to nonprofits. But our next step is to help develop ecosystem maps and fashion innovation hubs for different cities from around the world, so they start speaking to each other. Under Armour is headquartered in Baltimore, but they don't cut and sew or make anything from start to finish there. So I'd love for us to see how we can start building those ecosystem maps anywhere from Bali to Baltimore, and then start having them speak to each other, see what collaborations exist, and then attract that some of the service production, prototyping first, gauging market interest to start seeing lean launch concepts and small batch production anywhere to like 100 units, and start working with key specializations. So it becomes kind of this global conversation as to reactivating impact-driven fashion entrepreneurship around the world.
Thank you very much. And we have one last, I think, Natalia. We heard that you're on deck, de Ecuador.
Hola, hi everyone. I'm Natalia, I'm from Quito, Ecuador, and we are creating a project that it's an innovation hub specialized in agrotech and biotech. We are starting from the point that our country is very rich. It's one of the most biodiverse countries, but we are not doing it. We are not doing our agricultural sector in a technological way at all, not sustainable either. And we want to help more agriculture farmers to go more tech and also to be more productive itself, so create more opportunities for all. So we are starting from a point that we are bringing some companies and also some universities and also the mayor of the city, the municipality, to create this hub. We started last year just creating the model, and we are developing right now. We are already have funds. We are raising funds. We are raising funds, and we are near to $2 million, like only private funds, and also the municipality with $2 million. And we are starting from there to connect all these different capacities that we already have as a country and as a city. And then our aim is to have lots of startups creating solutions for the agricultural sector and transforming with biotech all these different materials that we have, like such as bananas, cacao, and all these products that we are already leading in the export game. So this is our project, and I'm happy to share with you. And also, if you have more questions later, thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia. So we're going to wrap up the session. I wanted to do sort of Q&A, but I think they're probably going to kick us out shortly. But I did one question as I was walking around, which was sort of about how these are typically financed, where you get the money from for these hubs. The short answer is that it typically does come from the public sector, but it could be at any level of government, city, state, national government. There is some philanthropy. France's Station F was philanthropically funded. It's usually not corporate, except multiple corporates sometimes will make smaller donations, but you usually don't get the big donations, partly because you want it to be neutral. But with a little luck, if you're really focused on something that matters a lot to a corporation, you might get $5 or $10 million out of a corporation. What's most effective at getting the money loosened up for your project is to show what other people are doing. So do an analysis of similar initiatives in competing districts and competing regions. I'm fond of saying that when we're talking with the Japanese, encouraging them to do this, we tell them what the Koreans are doing. And when we're trying to convince the Koreans to do it, we tell them what the Japanese are doing. So you can use that to kind of move this forward. If you have questions for us, I put my email up there. It's rowe@cic.com. We build and operate and advise and do all this stuff. If we can be helpful to you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks very much.